If you've ever considered writing your children's book in rhyme, this video is for you. And if you already have, this video will give you 6 insightful ways you can use to tweak your rhyming story to make it even better. So let's jump right in. Hi there, I'm Eevi, an award-winning children's author and ghostwriter over on eevijones.com and the creator of Children's Book University. I create videos specifically for children's authors, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my weekly videos. I mentioned rhymes in my book, How to Self-Publish a Children's Book, and also in one of my previous videos. But rhyming is so near and dear to my heart and deserves its own video. And so it is my hope that what you're learning here will, 1, help and guide you whenever you're writing your own rhyming story. 2, inspire you to give writing in rhyme a try if you haven't yet. It's so beautiful and makes reading our book out loud to our little ones so much more fun, especially if it is a book for younger kids. And 3, it is my hope that you will see that making our rhymes better doesn't necessarily mean we have to rewrite the entire story. Instead, we can tweak it. And in this video, I'll show you how. Now, to me, this topic is a big one and near and dear to my heart because writing in rhyme is my absolute favorite way of writing, both for my own books as well as those I ghostwrite. The word count of children's books is already extremely low when compared to any other genre. And when writing in rhyme, this already low word count usually gets lower still. And so what that means is that every single word that goes into our rhyming story has to be just right because every single word counts. I would say about 1/3 of my one-on-one feedback sessions for aspiring children's authors is for rhyming stories. And so there are 6 main tips I always like to share, and now I'm sharing them with you as well. Number 1, when writing in rhyme, we will want to pay attention to the rhythm and meter of our rhymes. Now, just a quick warning, when it comes to poetry, there are different ways to describe different aspects like rhythm and meter, for example. To me personally, meter is the pattern of sounds, while rhythm is more the flow of sound that is created by our words' accented and unaccented syllables as well as our pauses. But I'm not going too deep here with the terminology because we don't have to get too technical and we don't have to know about scansion or metrical units like trimeter or tetrameter in order to write our children's book in rhyme. But when it comes to writing children's books, what we do want to pay attention to is this. When reading our rhyming story out loud, it has to flow nicely and easily. Because as a children's book, our book will more often than not be read out loud, right? And that's because parents or other caregivers usually read books to their kids, especially younger ones. And so we will want to make sure to make reading our book a pleasant experience because I'm sure you've had this before where you were trying to read a book out loud, but it just didn't flow, but rather felt a bit bumpy. And that can get quite frustrating to the reader. And that's not what we want, right? We want to make it fun to, 1, read our story, and fun to listen to our story because that's what gets our story read over and over again. Now, of course, we have lots of exceptions that are meant to be a fun challenge to read out loud, like Fox and Socks by Dr. Seuss, for example. Dr. Seuss can get away with it because that's what he's known for, right? His fun, creative rhymes and made-up words where people are willing to try and break their tongues. But for the most part, we will want to make sure our rhyming story flows. So when it comes to writing in rhyme, my first ninja tip is this. Without getting technical at all, something that always helps me personally with the flow is to write my rhyming parts or sentences underneath each other. And if they are about the same length, then they usually flow well because being the same length usually also means that they have the same or close to the same number of syllables, which always helps with the rhythm. But we can also always simply count the syllables instead. So here's an example from the beautiful book Giraffes Can't Dance by Giles Andre, where the number in the parentheses indicates the number of syllables on that line. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked toward the floor, but the lions saw him coming and they soon began to roar. So they have 13 and 15 syllables while also being about the same length. So it's really easy to read because it flows quite nicely. Now in this example here, I changed the words a bit so that there is a slightly bigger difference in the number of syllables and line length to show you how this really affects the flow of the text. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked toward the wet floor. The lion saw him and began to roar. So the lines still rhyme, but with the first line having 14 syllables and the second only 10, it no longer flows the way it did in the first example. And just looking at the difference in length of these two lines already tells us that it probably won't flow as nicely as it could or should. So that's why A, I always write my rhyming lines underneath each other, and B, I always read my lines out loud. Here's another example. Then he found a little clearing and he looked up at the sky. The moon can be so beautiful, he whispered with a sigh. And again, we have 15 and 14 syllables that are very close. Here are the same lines again, altered just a tiny bit. Then he discovered a little clearing and he looked up at the blue sky. The moon is beautiful, he whispered with a sigh. And just like before, the lines still rhyme, but with the first line having 18 syllables and the second only 12, it no longer flows the way it did in the first example. And again, just looking at the difference in length of these two lines, we can already tell that it probably won't flow as nicely as it could or should. So if our lines are about the same length and have about the same number of syllables, then we usually have a good rhythm going. There are of course exceptions, but that's usually the more general guideline I use when writing simple rhymes and that I share with my students during my one-on-one feedback sessions. Number 2, when writing in rhyme, it is all about the type of rhyme. Now, not every rhyme has to be a true rhyme or exact rhyme where the ending sounds match exactly, like mice, twice, nice, rice, or street, meet, fleet. Near rhymes where the final consonants of the words rhyme are a great option as well, like meet, east, or dog, walk. But if possible, we do want to try to keep true rhymes the main type of rhyme. And the number one tool I use for this all the time when I write in rhyme is rhymezone.com. And so my ninja tip here is to select the near rhyme option in the drop-down menu over on Rhymezone, because that will always provide us with so many more options and ideas. Number 3, when writing in rhyme, once we have established a pattern or scheme for our individual verses or stanzas, we will want to try to stick to that pattern throughout our story. So for example, the lines from the book Giraffes Can't Dance, the way they appear in the book, follow the simple 4-line rhyme pattern where the rhyme scheme can be described as A, B, C, B, where lines A and C don't rhyme because they each have a unique ending, and the 2 B lines do rhyme with the ending words floor and roar. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked toward the floor, but the lions saw him coming and they soon began to roar. There are many different patterns, with A, B, C, B just being one of them. And so we generally don't want to break our pattern once we have established or chosen one. But of course, there are always exceptions. For example, we may decide to break that pattern if we want to really emphasize a certain point in our story. But when we break that pattern, we should only do so intentionally, not because we didn't realize that we had a pattern to begin with. And so my third ninja tip here is that once we are done writing our rhyming story, we will want to always make sure to go back and look if we are using the same pattern throughout. Number 4 is such a big one. When writing in rhyme, we should never settle for a rhyme, and we shouldn't just use filler words because we can't come up with a better rhyme. And what I mean by filler words here is simply a line in our verse that doesn't really add to our story, right? It's just there to complete the rhyme. So for example, if we have something like this: his favorite month each year was May because the sun was shining, so he said, hey. That's a really silly example, but something I see all the time. I can tell right away when something was simply added to the story because the author had a hard time finding a good rhyme. In this instance here, a good rhyme for the word May. This example right here is from one of my one-on-one feedback sessions that also used a filler word or filler phrase. Ron says, let's go. I've planned such a big day. Danny grabs her jacket and says, hooray. And so what I suggested was this tweak right here. Let's go, Ron says. I've planned a big day. Danny grabs her coat and they're on their way. During any of my sessions, I always try to honor the author's original storyline and try to help come up with alternatives that still remain true to the original thought or idea of each verse. And with just a tiny tweak, we can further or add to our story that seems a bit less like a filler, while still staying true to that original idea for that particular verse. But what if we can't come up with a better rhyme? So if we are having trouble finding a better rhyme for each of our lines, I've come up with 4 main options that have helped me greatly over the years. Option 1, if we can't find a rhyme, we can take a break and get back to that particular part in our story later. Writing and rhyme can be challenging, and so it often takes me weeks, if not months, to work on just 300 words. That's why I charge what I charge when I'm ghostwriting, right? And that's okay. We want to find the best possible combination of rhymes because we want to make sure to make every single word count. And if that means we have to take a break from a particular verse, then that's absolutely okay. Option 2, if we don't mind changing the words that we can't find a rhyme to, we can use a tool like the good old thesaurus and try to find a different word that means the same thing. A synonym, right? And then try finding a rhyming word for that new word. I do this all the time and it really helps so much. And for that, I simply use the online version thesaurus.com. So here's a great example from, again, one of my one-on-one feedback sessions where the original line reads, "A tandem bike is a bike made for twins. They fasten their helmets up under their chins." This is such a cute rhyme, but tandems aren't just for twins, right? So what if we were to keep everything the same, but used a different word for twins? And so using the thesaurus, this is how we tweaked it. A tandem bike is a bike made for twos. They fasten their helmets and put on their shoes. Option 3, if we really want to keep the words that we are having a hard time finding a rhyme for, we could try to simply change the order of the words. So we have a different word at the end of the line, so we can try to find a better rhyme for that new word. Here's another rhyme from one of my one-on-one sessions. "The boy is safe with mom and dad. Surf and rescue is so rad." Here I simply suggested to change the order on that top line to help make that second line even more meaningful. So here's what we came up with. "With his mom and his dad, the boy is safe. Lending a hand feels so special and brave." Now the second line feels a bit less like a filler, while the idea behind the verse remains the same. And option 4, if we can't seem to find a rhyme, we can try to look at the bigger picture. For example, is there perhaps a way to combine this one verse with another one? This right here is an example from, again, one of my one-on-one feedback sessions where the author had originally 2 verses. Verse 1, "What will be placed on his face, you ask? A soft and shiny blue super mask." Verse 2, "Carl is ready to go save the day. Look out, Super Carl is on his way." The first verse to me seemed a bit like it was using a filler word or phrase. And again, I always try to keep as much of the original text in my suggestions as possible. So a great way to tweak this was to simply combine the ideas of these 2 verses. "With a shiny blue mask, he's off to save the day. Look out, big, big world, Super Carl is on his way." So here we were able to eliminate any filler phrases or words by simply combining 2 verses. So when writing in rhyme, be patient with yourself and the process. Don't force it and don't settle. Number 5, when writing in rhyme, it is really helpful to focus on one main idea per verse. Oftentimes, we want to put too much information into just one single verse, which is how we sometimes end up with really messy lines. So what has really helped me over the years is to set an intention for each verse. So every time I work on a new verse, I ask myself, what is the one main idea I want to bring across in this verse? What do I want to accomplish with this verse? And what is it meant to add to my story? And then I try to address just this one idea in that stanza. That way I don't try to pack too much into it. And if it doesn't add to my story, I often also consider not including it and simply cut it out. So here's an example from my co-authored book, The Magic of Choice. For this particular verse, I really wanted to share that while it's hard to ask for help sometimes, it's okay to do so. And that accepting help is okay too. And after having worked on this for days, trying to squeeze all that information into just one single verse, I remembered my own rule. And that's to just pursue or answer one main idea per stanza. And so what I ended up doing was to split what I wanted to write into 2 verses, resulting in these lines right here. Seeking help may be scary, yet you should know that if you don't ever ask, the answer will always be no. So it's okay to reach out and to fully embrace a giver's help offered and to accept it with grace. So remembering this rule before I work on a new verse always helps me focus. And finally, number 6 when writing in rhyme is to make sure to show the reader how to read our rhymes. This is such a big one that I see so often, yet I've never ever seen anyone address this before. In poetry, line breaks and the way we use punctuation is so important because they indirectly provide cues for pauses, which will almost always affect our story's meter and rhythm. So we will want to make sure we provide these cues. As a reader, it's no fun having to figure out how the lines of a story are supposed to be read, so they rhyme. And so what we as authors can do is display our lines the way they are meant to be read with proper line breaks. So again, let's take an example from Giraffes Can't Dance with these lines right here, slightly rearranged. Then one by one each, animal who'd been there at the dance arrived while Gerald boogied and watched him, quite entranced. Now, if this is our first time reading this book and we are not actively paying attention, we might not even notice that this part is meant to rhyme. So a more thoughtful way of arranging these lines would be the way they are properly shown in the book, like this right here. Then one by one, each animal who'd been there at the dance arrived while Gerald boogied on and watched him, quite entranced. So we want to make sure to break our lines in such a way that lets the reader know where to take a natural pause or break and where we have our rhymes, so they become very clear. So the way we want to display our lines is meant to help the reader read those lines properly. So here my main ninja tip would be A, always plan out how we want our lines to be read and that match our line breaks accordingly. And B, read our lines out loud and maybe even have other family members or friends read them out loud to make sure our lines truly flow and that they are not bumpy. And that extra step of having others read our lines can be really helpful and insightful because we as authors know how the lines are meant to be read, right? But by having others read these lines, we'll see if how they are displayed helps others with the proper reading as well. Now again, this video is not meant to be a tutorial on how to write poetry, right? It is purely meant to help us tweak our rhyming story, especially if we have never written in rhyme before. And I say this because there are very many passionate poets that may feel that there is so much more to say about this. So these are truly just my own rules I created over the years for my own writing that my students in my one-on-one sessions found really helpful. And just like with any other story, our ending is so important as well. So much so that I have a separate video on how to create the best ending for our story. It's one of my favorite ones, even though it's a slightly older one. So I made sure to share the link to it in the description below. I so hope this video inspired you to give writing in rhyme a try. It does take practice, but it is so rewarding and so much fun to read and share with little ones. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't yet. It really encourages me to keep making free videos for you just like this one. Here's to your very own rhyming story. Bye!